So let me take a moment to introduce probably one of the most influential people I've had in my career. I can't remember, Jim, if it was the late 80s or the early 90s when you, as part of Technico, you brought about that whole coaching interaction that brought Red Auerbach and John Wooden and George Allen, Werner Erhard, and Tim Galloway to the front and trained us in really what is coaching and how do coaches see the world and how do coaches coach in order to maximize the performance of their players. So I want to begin with first thanking you because it's made a profound difference over the last 25 to 30 years. Introducing this whole concept that was just probably nascent or not even on the mat at that point. So I'd like to begin by asking you a question: how did you note that coaching was a missing piece, and that if it were available, what difference it would make in management?
Well, thank you, Mark, and it's good to see you again. The coaching idea, I guess, emerged for me. The company was called Transformational Technologies in those days, and it was in the middle of the 80s. And I'd been working on issues of culture change and how organizational transformation happened and what was required in order to facilitate the implementation of that kind of change. And it occurred to me that management was not able to implement well many good ideas, and that in fact that had been an organizing question for me for a long time, which is, why is it so difficult to implement change? And at that point, I began to ask myself, what are the different ways that leaders, managers at that time affect performance of other people? And that's when the idea, well, coaches are doing that. And what's the difference between coaching and management? And that's when I began to formulate the idea that coaching was not just simply a different skill, and it wasn't just about the subject matter or the sport or the field that's being coached. So we brought together the people that you just mentioned, the great coaches of that time, to inquire into what is common to all coaching, regardless of what's being coached. And that's which led to the article that I wrote called Coaching and the Art of Management. And today I now have a much deeper and broader understanding of the phenomenon of coaching and the theory behind it that makes it work when it works. But the origin of it, at least not, of coaching outside of sports and performing arts, really was an interest in organizational change, and that was what drove my inquiry.
How would you distinguish, define, describe coaching? And in your view, how would you do that? What would you say?
Well, the short answer would be coaching is a relationship with someone who is committed to your commitments and someone who's a different observer of your behavior or your actions, and someone who has the ability to work with you in a way that opens up possibilities and choices that you don't normally have. So from my point of view, the main distinction between management and coaching is that in a management relationship, the power is with the authority and the knowledge of the manager. In a coaching relationship, the power is almost entirely with the coachee or the person being coached, because all you have to do to negate coaching is not listen.
As a coach, I know that my focus is on the player and the relationship with the player. What is distinguishable between the relationship of a manager or advisor as compared to a coach with what you call the coachee or the player?
Well, again, I think the short answer is that a relationship with a manager basically is a function of the managerial authority. The authority of the manager to hire, to fire, to order, to direct. You don't have a lot of freedom in a managerial relationship, at least in our traditional mindset. In a coaching relationship, It's really, what is the coachee or the player committed to, and what are they committed to accomplishing that they cannot accomplish by themselves?
In my view of coaching, and as I coach, one of the things I notice that's different is how I listen to the player, and different when I'm trying to manage somebody than when I'm trying to coach somebody. How does a coach listen to the player as opposed to a manager listen to the person managing?
The way I think about that, Mark, is really captured in one of my favorite terms, which is called serene ambition. Serene ambition is a central idea in my work, having to do with how do we include the paradox, or how do we relate to the paradox of being serene, meaning everything is perfect the way it is, and simultaneously have ambition and possibility. Mostly those two occurrences don't happen together. When I'm coaching someone, I sort of am using that distinction to orient my relationship with you if I'm coaching you. So for example, from my point of view, the coachee, the person being coached, is absolutely perfect the way they are. They don't need to be fixed. They don't need to be changed. There's nothing wrong. And I accept that whatever history or whatever story you've got about you is fine, that's yours, but that's not my business as a coach. But there's another you, and let's call it you as a possibility. And that is something that I, the coach, am creating. Okay, I'm not judging how much possibility is over there. I'm committed that there's always more possibility than you can see. So in a way, I'm relating to who you are as a possibility when I'm coaching you. Now, what that does is allow me to observe your actions and behavior. It allows me to listen to your commitments. It allows me to interact with you in a way that's quite rigorous and quite direct in the context of your commitment. But again, coaching is the only relationship I know where there's a kind of creating who you can be as a possibility is the foundation of what allows me to coach you. Because I'm not coaching you against your history.
And it's not a transfer of information. It's not a packet of information that goes from one side to the other, although that might be included. More, it's engaged with the client in a way that has them see that what they haven't seen before. What do you need from the player? What do you need from the person you're coaching to be successful? What is it that they need to bring or she needs to bring to the table?
Well, in a word, I think trust and authentic commitment.
And how do you generate that level of trust, authentic commitment, all of that, in terms of, what has to be present for the player to see and the coach to be able to fully trust them?
Well, that's a great way you're phrasing that question, Mark, because it's not something I do. Almost everything that happens in a coaching conversation or a coaching relationship is a function of the coachee's choice. So if I start a relationship with you as a coach, let's be clear that this isn't going to work unless you trust me. Now, whether you trust me or not is 100% up to you. I can't do anything to produce that trust. But what I can do is demand that trust be present if we're going to have an effective and an honest and authentic coaching relationship.
In your methodology, do you set conditions before you go into the coaching interaction? How do you set up a coaching interaction?
The answer is yes, and it may be somewhat variable depending upon the person. But the thing I just said to you, for example, if you want to have me be your coach, requires that you essentially trust that I'm committed to your commitment and that you're not relating to me from a point of view of whether you agree or disagree with what I'm saying. Now, if the coaching isn't effective or it isn't working, I invite you to leave because I don't need a coachee to coach. I think where most coaches fail is they start to try to project their thoughts and ideas on top of the coachee. So they start trying to give answers or give formulas or give recipes, and that becomes a kind of managerial / coaching relatedness. My view is that mostly what I need to communicate is what I observe and trust the coachee, because trust goes both ways. Trust the coachee to be able to take the action necessary to implement or affect or accomplish whatever we're talking about.
So in the last 30 years, coaching was an adjunct, a piece on the end, and now the coaching industry has exploded. There are many coaching programs, there are certifications. But what do you think is the cause of that? And in that we started in '86 probably with a few hundred people, and now I don't know an HR department that doesn't offer coaching.
That's really interesting you should say that, Mark, because I joke with a lot of people and say, I wish I'd known what was going to happen, or I'd have bought some stock in myself. The truth is, when it was happening at the time, I saw coaching as an interesting addition to a kind of consulting strategy, and perhaps an interesting way of building more powerful management in organizations. I didn't have any idea how rapidly it was going to catch on. And that within literally a couple of 3 years, the word was very, very commonplace. I remember the CEO of, I think it was AT&T, got wind of this, and within a few months had ordered everybody in his company to change their titles to coach. It is also true that coaching became pretty much a substitute term for a lot of things that were already happening. So therapists started calling themselves coaches. A lot of teachers started calling themselves coaches. And coaching itself became one of these terms where it's kind of a distinction without a difference. Today in many, many organizations, it's very difficult to distinguish coaching from facilitation, which I think is pretty much a tragedy, because it tends to reduce coaching to some kind of commodity where human resources departments can try to do the usual kinds of things that they when they're hiring people to do stuff. I started a university in Argentina to teach coaching, and it was a 2-year curriculum accredited by the government. But about 75% of that curriculum was working with people in terms of developing their core maturity and the core way of being, in a way of being able to get their ego out of the way. And about 25% had to do with technique and style and how you actually execute a coaching relationship. So from my point of view, what makes coaching effective, for sure, and what really is at the core of what I think of as authentic coaching, is a kind of way of being. It's a capacity to be committed to someone in a way that removes your ego, in which you are, it's like an unconditional commitment to the possibility the other person is.
I can give you a personal experience of you coaching me. I think it might have been 91 or 89. I can't remember now. Dates and times disappear from me. But what I do recall is that you spoke to who I wanted to be, not who I thought I was. And in speaking to that, it allowed me to step into a place that I was unable to do myself. So I wanted to thank you for that. It was life-altering. How do you see the future of coaching? When you look out there on the horizon and you see, everybody's a coach now. In the business that I had been in, people are saying that they're coaches, but they're not coaching. They're mentoring, facilitating, giving answers, telling people how to do it, but it's not coaching. So how do you see this future unfolding?
Well, there's two things. I think in my own personal practice, I tend to take the terminology of leadership and coaching and kind of mush them together and point out to people that if you looked at the actions of a coach, the conversations of a coach, they're almost identical to the actions of a leader. The context may be a bit different, where the context for coaching may be a particular game or a specific objective, whereas the coaching of leadership may be broader and more historical. But nonetheless, the point here is that the field of coaching, as you mentioned earlier, has become almost of an industry. There's schools, there are foundations now. There's a journal of coaching, I think, there's a journal of the philosophy of coaching. So it's a field that is nascent, I think, in its emergence. I have no idea how it's ultimately going to turn out, but it has a similar arc to where the field of management consulting was when I started in the 60s, where it was as much of an art as it was a science, and there was constantly an attempt to codify, what made great coaching so that people could purchase coaching or purchase consulting with some degree of confidence in the professionalism of the coach or the consultant. And I think this is mostly trying to follow the field of medicine and psychology and some perhaps accounting, where you have practices around a particular issue or a particular concern that have evolved over time to a kind of discipline. And then the discipline itself begins to become codified and institutionalized in a way that gives it a certain legitimacy and a certain regularity and so forth. And I think that's healthy, and I think that's good. On the other hand, almost all of those professions become trapped in their own discipline. They tend to become rigid and reject innovation and become defensive institutions rather than institutions that are effective in producing true innovation and breakthroughs and so forth and so on.
What do you think of the certificate programs? I know that my wife went through a program called LEOS, and she has done a rather remarkable job as a coach. I watch her with clients. I watch her interact with people in a way that is really where the coach is coming from, not where they're getting to. How can someone know what kind of coach to choose? What are they looking for in a coach? Because there's a lot of coaches out there.
Well, I mean, again, I think coaching is everything from people who spent thousands and thousands of hours developing their skill to people who are unemployed that are just putting coach on a business card and hanging out a shingle and hoping that somebody will buy. So there's a whole spectrum of competencies and capabilities across the field. I'm thinking it's probably good that people take the time to go through some kind of a regimented learning cycle and some kind of a certification process. But I myself, when I had my university, would certify coaches. But I'm always careful to tell them, look, this certification doesn't mean anything. The only thing that it does is it's like a ticket into a game. It's an opening for opportunity. At the bottom, it's a function of what are the results of the people you're coaching. If the people that you're coaching aren't producing results, and if they're not having breakthroughs, why would anybody want to coach if they're not going to have a breakthrough? If they're not having those kind of results, then you're failing as a coach, period. Secondly, that also is the flip side of how do I know if my coach is effective? If I'm not producing significant progress in the area that I'm committed to, then I should probably reconsider the coach. The bottom line is that coaching is about helping other people produce unpredictable results. If you can do it without a coach, then just do it. If you're doing it because you hope that something will happen, but you're not really deeply committed to that, don't bother. The point here is that coaching, it's like poker. The cards speak. The results of a coach speak. They speak for themselves, which also opens up one other point I want to make, Mark, which is one of the biggest threats to coaching is what I would consider to be the kind of cause and effect paradigm that most of us live in. When you try to prove a direct correlation like cause and effect between what the coach is doing and what the coachee is producing, I think that's a false way of thinking, and I think it's dangerous because it begins to reduce coaching to something that you're doing rather than a way of being or a way of relating. It's working on the the way people relate and observe their world. It's not trying to give them different moves. Now, yes, there's a certain amount of skill in any game. But the difference between great players and great coaches who consistently are pushing the boundary of their discipline.
I've been coaching now for 30 years. I'm finding that as opposed to other body functions, I'm getting better, not worse. And as I age, then I have a capacity to see the player more clearly and the field more clearly. Just to end, there's something that you have always done, and I don't know if this can be addressed, is that you actually shift how people see their world and themselves. Could you talk a bit about that? You know, in your coaching, they don't see themselves nor the field that they're on in the same way. What is and I think that's the distinction the coaching is, they have a capacity to impact that. Could you just talk a bit about that?
Well, there's two or three things in what you've asked there, Mark, that I'd like to say by way of completion here. We have not mentioned the notion of time. I think that time is fundamental to what you're talking about, because a coach has developed the capacity to come from the future. Coaches don't go into a game to find out who's going to win. They have to generate an authentic experience and way of relating that the game is already won. And the reason that's true is because unless you come from the point of view that it's already happened, you cannot observe what's missing in the moment. And that's the fundamental skill of a coach, is the observer that can see what's missing in order to have the game succeed or win or whatever the coaching is about. I always start from the coachee already knows. The coachee already has accomplished what we're here to do. Now, I have to be able to hold that space and hold that commitment while we go through the process of the coachee actually making that, they're succeeding in making that accomplishment. So yes, I am showing people what's missing, but when they are able to commit to that and act upon it, they themselves become different observers. You could sort of say, when they can see themselves through my eyes, the coaching is complete. And then it's about let's creating a bigger possibility. I also stop coaching, and people ask me, when do you give up? And I say, I give up when I can't see a possibility anymore. When I can no longer see you as a larger possibility, our coaching relationship is no longer effective because it's counterproductive. It's not going to happen. I want to end this with one thought. I also, you mentioned age 2 or 3 times in this interview, and I'm, I think, a little bit older than you. It's a question of wisdom. And here's where wisdom and coaching kind of come together. I've landed on the idea that wisdom is a verb, that wisdom is about taking my experience and my knowledge and giving it to another person in a way that brings out the best in them.